independent pro-Brexit candidate. Sorry, Aaron. Didn't get into my imagination. Anyway, Aaron, my sincere apologies, mate. So you're standing for the seat of Stourbridge, of course. Still a member of the Brexit Party?
Well, the Brexit Party don't have members, have supporters, but no, I was stood down.
Okay, so you're running as an independent candidate? Yep. And Dr. Ellie Chowns, Green Party candidate, currently an MEP, that may not be for much longer, and standing for the seat of Southwest Herefordshire, is it?
No, North Herefordshire.
North Herefordshire. Okay, and before Ellie entered politics, she was a lecturer at the University of Birmingham in the International Development Department. Okay, next we have Adrian Bailey, who is the retiring Labour MP for West Bromwich West. Adrian tells me that after 19 years in the game and being of a mature, respectable age, he now wants to have time left in his life to pursue other things, and I can only wholeheartedly sympathise with him in that regard. Okay? Then we have Annette Willcox, who is standing as a Brexit Party candidate for the seat of Barr, I believe. Yeah? Okay. Annette, I'm told that you're a BCU alumni, that you did study at University of Central England. But it was a
when it was the Polytechnic, yes, I studied accountancy with my accountancy foundation.
So you have a local connection to Barr in that sense?
Yeah, I grew up in the area. I lived in the area till my early 30s.
Great stuff. Well, I'm Australian myself, in case you couldn't tell. I've been here for 20 years, so that's almost local, I guess. And then finally, we have David Craddock, who is our Liberal Democrat senior spokesperson for the West Midlands. Yes, right. David, not standing as a candidate per se, but in terms of talking to party manifestos and party policies, I think you'll do just fine in that regard.
Hopefully.
Okay. Well, just remember there are no stupid questions or responses necessarily, just stupid people, which I'm clearly one because I refer to Aaron as Aaron Banks. How many times can I say Aaron Banks in this morning's session?
So far.
Well, there you go. No more mention of Aaron Banks, folks. Okay, so very simply, I'm just going to ask some fairly anodyne questions. I think, Aaron, I'll start with yourself. Just give yourself 5 minutes to introduce and give yourself the basic platform, as it were, and then I'll ask the questions.
Sure. Okay. I've not been involved in politics for very long. As the little bio says on the sheet of paper, I joined the Conservative Party in January 2018. And the reason I joined was quite simple. Growing up, I grew up in Dudley, which I'm not too sure if anybody's familiar with Dudley. It's kind of not the nicest area. I like it, I love it at home, but that's where I grew up. And when I met my wife when I was 21, she was from Stourbridge, so when we decided to move in together, she didn't want to downgrade, so I upgraded, so I'm in Stourbridge. Since I've lived there, I've become self-employed, we've got 3 kids, and I've seen the area gradually decline over the decade I've lived there. I've lived there 12 years now. And I'm extremely frustrated seeing the local police station close, the local college closed. Obviously the way Brexit's handled. I mean, I did vote leave. I believe the country is strong outside of the EU. And at the end of the day, we're all quite polarised and split on Brexit, which is, that's the beauty of democracy, I guess. Yeah, I got involved because the local MP I didn't particularly rate what she was doing. So I joined. At the end of the day, you can't make change. You can't have an opinion from the outside looking in. You have to get involved. So I joined up, not really knowing what to expect, and from the off, I think I was very well liked by the MP because I challenged her views. I challenged what she was doing. I didn't particularly like some things that she did. To her sort of displeasure, I guess I was elected as deputy chairman in March this year. And then when the Brexit Party formed, I joined the Brexit Party. I applied, I didn't get anywhere because I had no political experience, but I liked what they were doing, so the £100 joining fee, or whatever you want to call it, I didn't mind at all. I supported what they were doing. When I got selected, Annette will tell you, the screening process was vigorous. I think they stopped short of waterboarding, basically. They were very thorough. And as I say, I was a Brexit Party PPC up until 3 or 4 weeks ago now, when everybody in the Conservative area was stood down for the reasons Nigel Farage listed. For me, the journey didn't stop there because in Stourbridge, it was a 64% leave voting seat. The current MP was stepping down. She wasn't a very well-liked figure in the area. I was privy to a lot of emails and conversations that others weren't because of being on the exec board in Stourbridge constituency. The replacement is no better. She's a Remainer. I hate that term. I hate the words leave a Remainer because we're sort of 4 years too late for that phrase. And as I say, I was the only lead voting candidate that would have stood. The Lib Dems, the Greens, Labour, and the new Conservative candidates were all Remain voters in a 64% lead constituency. At the time as well, I've done a lot of work. I've done a lot of work setting up supporters and basically sort of getting things ready for when the election was called. So it felt like I had the rug pulled from under me when I was stood down. When I was stood down, I was called straight away and I was asked, would you take up West Bromwich East? I said no, I didn't get involved in politics because of Brexit. I got involved in politics because of my area, I wanted to see change. So I declined that and decided to stand as an independent, and that's kind of where I'm at. For me, the big priority, Brexit's important. At the end of the day, it just needs to be done. I don't mean get Brexit done in the Conservative sense because, as I'm sure we'll go into, the Conservative version of Brexit isn't the same as what people voted for because it keeps us tied into the institutions of the European Union. But also, it's about local change at the end of the day. It's about the rise in crime. It's about the lack of funding, thanks to the Conservatives. It's about school education not being as good as it could be. It's about local businesses closing down because of raising tax rates and raising regulations. I just want to see my town and our country improve, and that's kind of where I'm standing. I'm under no illusion that I'm going to win because it's a very slim to none chance, but it's about making a stand. It's about making a stand against these career politicians who essentially get airdropped into constituencies who don't know the area, they're not familiar with the people, not familiar with the area, but they get voted in on the colour of their rosette, which I think is wrong. I think we need local people standing in the area, speaking for local people. And that for me is, I think that's all about political reform. That's a long name, and I understand that. So as I say, for me, standing as an independent is about sort of making, it sounds very sort of, goals, but it's about making a statement and about trying to set up a trend, because if it doesn't happen now, it will happen in the future. If these career politicians keep taking us for a ride, keep misrepresenting us, eventually somebody will stand, if it's not me, and somebody will open the door and make positive change happen.
Thanks, Aaron. That's a good point to pause it. I'll let the rest of the candidates introduce themselves and we'll come back with the question around. Ellie, 5 minutes for yourself, please.
Okay, I'm not a career politician either. I got involved in politics less than 5 years ago because I was frustrated at the direction that I saw politics going in, actually. I'd spent my whole adult and in fact my teenage life kind of campaigning for social and environmental change. And I saw what was happening, particularly with the rise of UKIP actually, is what drove me to get involved in politics, because I felt that the country was going in the wrong direction, becoming more closed, more blaming of others. And I felt I couldn't just sort of stand on the sidelines any longer and shout at the radio or throw things at the telly or just talk to my mates who felt the same as me actually. And so I got involved in politics. And I joined the Green Party because it was closest to my values. Now you don't join the Green Party if you want to be a career politician, right? Because we've got such an unfair voting system that the Greens are systematically kind of marginalised. But actually it's been a great experience. I stood for local election, didn't get elected first time, then did in a by-election and got re-elected in May this year. In an area that 8 years ago was 80% Tory, I got 79% of the vote this time round on a 50% turnout. So it really shows that people change their minds when they have an alternative option and they know that that option can win and they like what that option has done in the past. And the Greens now share power at the local level in Herefordshire. I've always been a passionate Remainer, sorry for using that word, but I've always passionately believed that our best future is in the EU for those reasons, for values-based reasons, right? We need to work with our neighbours. I'm interested in international cooperation and spent my whole life working in international development, which is about working with people of all different backgrounds to make the world a bit fairer for everybody, right? So I campaigned in the referendum, both in North Herefordshire and in Sheffield, where I was working at the time, and I was devastated by the result, but I didn't kind of give up. I didn't feel that's it. I felt you've got to keep on making the case for the things that you believe in, and that's what you do as a you lose an election to a Tory, you don't give up and go home and think, oh, well, that's that. You think, right, I'm going to fight it again next time. And as I said, things can change. Democracy is an ongoing process. So I was honoured to be elected as the first Green MEP for the West Midlands in May this year, and now I'm standing in my third election of the year to be MP in North Herefordshire, a safe Tory seat. I don't think that the general election is the right way to resolve the Brexit mess. From my perspective, one of the key reasons that we're still in this mess is because people who wanted to leave haven't been able to agree on what sort of leave they want. And they've spent 3.5 years arguing about that, and that's why I think we need a people's vote, because we need to put one clear leave option so that people are very clear about what that actually means back to the people against the Remain option, which has always been very clear what our deal actually has. I work in the European Union, I work in the Parliament. I know that it's not perfect. My political group has been massively involved in campaigns to reform and improve the European Union for decades. We've led on things like chucking out the Santé Commission 20 years ago on grounds of corruption. We've led on things like ensuring that commissioners get much more closely scrutinised by the Parliament, and you've seen the way that that power has been used over the last few months, where we've sent back 3. So I think it's not perfect, but the Parliament is a real kind of strength of the EU institutions, and very democratic, because everybody's vote pretty much counts equally, and that's why we've got 7 Greens across the UK now representing us. It's been really interesting to listen to you, Aaron, talking about why you're a Brexit Party member and candidate, and actually there's a lot of resonance with stuff that the Greens talk about. We're talking about 3 key things in this general election, right? We're talking about the need to tackle the climate and nature crisis. That is central to our understanding of the problems that we have at the minute, and I'm delighted that other parties across the board have actually started to come and talk our talk a little bit more, and now falling over themselves, competing over how many trees they're going to plant or how quickly they're going to move to zero carbon. You know, it's not just about planting trees, but I'm glad that the political discourse is moving in that way. And that's not just the Green Party, that's people like Extinction Rebellion, Greta Thunberg and the school strikers, David Attenborough, all of them pushing that up the political agenda. The second thing we talk about is the need for a people's vote to resolve the Brexit mess. And the third thing we talk about is the need to build a fairer country. Because I totally sympathise with you on things like, you know, concern about crime, lack of funding, the decline in public services, your frustration over that, police station closing, that's what you started off with. Yeah. We sympathise with that, but we totally disagree on the cause of that problem. To my mind, that has nothing to do with the EU and everything to do with Conservative government policies. After the financial crisis of 2008, we've had austerity for 9 years, first with the Conservative Liberal Coalition and more recently with the Conservative. As a local councillor, I've seen 40% of council funding slashed. That is a Westminster problem. We need to blame Westminster for those problems. And it's really frustrating to me that a certain part of the political spectrum, you referenced Aaron Baggs, you know, a certain, to my mind, not at all interested in the common person part of the political spectrum, those people have somehow managed to twist the blame and say, it's those Europeans over there, it's those immigrants that have caused our problems in this country, and to my mind that is totally wrong, totally misleading. And if we Brexit, we will be much financially poorer, but we will also be socially poorer as well, because we will have turned into a more insular, other-blaming country, and we will not have fixed the fundamental problem in our country, which is the totally unfair political system in which many, many people's votes don't count. The majority of people's votes get ignored in the composition of the government. We have a binary political system which rewards this very divisive nature of politics, rather than a better representative system like we have in Europe, where you have to sit down around the table, talk to people with whom you're theoretically on the opposite side, but you might actually have quite a lot of common ground. So we need to revolutionise that.
Okay, thanks, Ellie. Adrian.
Not very well.
Thank you. First of all, a overtly political point. I promise that it will be the only one. I do find it quite astonishing that we have a Conservative Party claiming it will be in government delivering Brexit, but cannot find anybody and have sufficient confidence in its own political position to attend an event like this. Having said that, I'll move on. My own personal position is that I am a Remainer. I have always been pro-EU. Indeed, looking around this room, I think I'm probably the only one who participated in the 1975 referendum campaign. Good, no. Join the club. No doubt you've got the scars as I have. I was pro-EU when the Labour Party was fiercely opposed to it. I think it probably delayed my political career by about 10 or 15 years, but my views on Europe have been totally consistent throughout my life. And they are based on two things. First of all, I believe as a matter of principle, it is good that countries work together to resolve differences and have the appropriate political machinery to do so, and having worked together as a group, they are then, having agreed a position, in a much better position to have a wider influence on other countries and areas outside in order to achieve their specified objectives. The second reason is that my admittedly fairly basic knowledge of economics has led me to believe, and I think this has been substantiated by evidence, that international trade does benefit all participants, providing that the framework for it is agreed and beneficial to all. And on that basis, moving in, if you like, a political structure with our near neighbours as Europe was the most sensible option that we had, and I believe has delivered enormous benefits to the area. And it's quite amazing that where we have a lot of countries who would be desperate to join Europe, this country alone seems to want to leave it. First of all, the result of the referendum, I, as I say, campaigned in the referendum. I was bitterly disappointed with the outcome. I felt that it was based on a number of false promises which were designed to, shall we say, work up people whose instincts, shall we say, were rather baser than any sort of reasoned assessment of the merits or demerits of Europe would have us or provide evidence for. But at the end of the day, as a representative of a constituency that voted 70% Brexit, I couldn't, shall we say, disregard the volume of feeling that there was then. And since then, my personal position has been that I respect that particular vote. I reluctantly voted to trigger Article 50, but I did so in part on the assurances that were given that we would have a trade deal that would protect our manufacturing industry. And as representing a constituency that had more foundries than any other in the country, and is crucial to the success of our flagship manufacturing industries, the motor industry and the aviation industry, my first priority has been to adopt a position that would deliver for those manufacturing industries. And Aaron talked about the decline of the black country. Yes, it has declined, but it's been seeing a renaissance now, and it is based on the success of these flagship manufacturing industries. And the one thing, one message that we're getting loud and clear from those industries is that a no-deal Brexit would profoundly damage their ability to continue with the success that they have generated over the last few years. This may well come out in questions, but I'll just move on now. The election, I think in the introduction you talked about manifesto. You can rest assured that I've managed to fight 10 parliamentary elections without reading my party's manifesto, and I'm not going to change the habit of a lifetime. I do know what our position is on Europe. I think that all political parties in this election have got a problem insofar as that there is no one, shall we say, majority viewpoint on Europe within the country, and to a certain extent, all the parties have had to adopt a position which they feel reflects the majority of their supporters, but which on detailed examination could be considered flawed. The advantage of my party's position is that it is the only one that really, no, I'll qualify that, you could argue the Liberal Party position does. It does guarantee that if we are elected, the interests of our manufacturing industry will be put first, because we are committed to a deal that involves a customs union and regulatory convergence with Europe, which are the essential prerequisites for the survival of our manufacturing industry. I am a Remainer. I would much prefer to vote Remain, because I think that's better than even coming out with a customs union and regulatory convergence. But a referendum that puts these two options does give a degree of choice across the board, but does protect the essential, if you like, sinew of our economy, and that's our manufacturing industry. My last point is that, consistent with my long-held views of the benefits of working within Europe, I think if you look ahead to the way the world is going, it is coalescing into trade blocks. You've got one around China, one around Singapore and the Asian countries. You've got the United States at war with China, and you will eventually have one in South America when Brazil gets around some of its domestic problems, and possibly one around Africa and Europe, although we're a long way from that yet. The benefits of international trade are dependent on two blocks, if you like, or maybe countries, having, shall we say, equal opportunities for the other country to benefit from the trade with them. If one country or one block is much smaller than the other, then it has far less to offer the larger block. And looking at the other blocks in the world, then I can see them giving preference to the EU with 440 million people than the UK with 60 million people, whatever warm words are made by certain leaders who can trust or not trust is appropriate. And that we are much better in Europe and leading Europe in, shall we say, holding our position in an evolving world situation than we are outside of it. I think we will be alone and vulnerable. My second point.
No, Adrian, can I stop you there, mate? We'll come back.
All right, I'll just say international companies.
Okay. Annette, please.
Okay, so I think I come from the opposite end of the spectrum of most people, probably close to one. So I grew up in Aston, just around the corner from here, in a single parent family, and I taught myself A-levels, I did accountancy at the Polytechnic as a foundation course, and I've worked since I was 16 years of age. I qualified as an accountant, and my last permanent role before I stepped down to have my children was financial controller for Europe, Middle East and Africa for an oil company. Our business, when you drilled the oil out of the sea or out of the desert, cleaned up the sand and the water and purified everything to make sure that the ecology in the sea and in the land was returned to its previous state. So I don't want people to get the impression that I went around the world taking the resources and wrecking the place. But I worked there, I got my job by my own merits and my own work, and I worked I worked 6 months in Paris, 6 months in Cologne, I worked in Italy, I worked in Spain, and I managed offices around Gabon and we had contracts with Libya and other, what we consider rogue states. I worked through the UN food programme, through the business through Paris. So I've worked internationally, I've worked locally, I've worked in manufacturing, I've worked in retail. I sorted letters in the post office and I've been a cleaner. So I have a broad spectrum of this life. I voted for Tony Blair in 1997 because he offered us a referendum on Maastricht. Because fundamentally for me, I believe in democracy. We lived with my grandmother growing up, and she was born in 1919. And at that point, women did not have the vote. The people who had the vote were rich property-owning people, and in the beginning only men. And then it was women who owned property. And then eventually, everyone got the vote. Now Britain has gone around the world implementing democracy. We have it in Canada, we have it in America, we have it in Australia. We went into Iraq and we went into Afghanistan and we put in democracy. We went to Libya and we took out Gaddafi and we implemented democracy. We did not ask the people in Libya, have democracy, you will be financially better off, you will be more secure. We went into these countries around the world and we said democracy is a fundamental foundation of humanity. When you vote, your government does what you vote for. Now I have watched the EU. I watched the EU pay manufacturing companies to take business out of this country, close down jobs in this country and move them to Hungary. Because that happened to my husband's company. They were paid to move the jobs to Hungary. Right? When you have the EU, which is not democratic, I had no political affiliations. I voted for Leave, but I've never been involved in politics. I'm 54 years of age, and at the end of March, when our government failed to carry out a democratic vote, I went and I knocked on the door of the Brexit Party, and I said 17.5 million people are relying on you to be honest, for your finances to be squeaky clean. Do you need any help? And I sat in the Brexit Party offices and I ran the finances through the EU elections. And when Gordon Brown, with no knowledge whatsoever, started kicking off and saying it's Russian money, Nigel came to me, he said, are you sure? Were you sure about everything? I said, send Gordon Brown down here and let's help if you like. The next day the EU Commission came in and the whole world knows that they found nothing because there was nothing. And that's my honesty and my integrity. And if I'm looking for a reference for a job, that's it. The world watched what I did and they found nothing because there was nothing. Now I believe fundamentally in democracy. And the reason I believe in democracy is because the people with a vested interest, the people for whom the world is going well for, do not want it to change. The people at the bottom, the poor people, of which I have been one for most of my life, are the majority. And democracy means that the people who are the haves and have the good things in this life have to take care of those that don't. Because if the majority do not have a fair shake in life, they can vote out those at the top who do. And it is the only thing in this whole world that keeps the people at the top honest. And David Cameron sent that leaflet through every single door in this country. And it said, we will leave the single market, we will leave the customs union, we will come out of the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice. That was on the basis on what Parliament voted to have that referendum, and it was the basis on, it was the only document that absolutely everybody saw. Whatever sort of the argument you saw, whatever bit of television you saw, that was a document that went to everyone and was available for everyone to read. And that is the only document on which we can say everybody was able to base their opinion, because it was the only thing that absolutely everybody was able to see. It was available in other forms if you couldn't read it. Okay? So that document must be the basis on which that referendum was called and on the basis on which that vote was held. It's the only thing that every one of us here knows about. Okay.
Thank you, mate.
So can I just say, when our politicians talk about we will be financially poorer, or we won't have control over this, or we won't have control over that, right? That is vested interests. We did not go to Libya and say you will be financially better off. And if you went now to India or Pakistan or Jamaica and said, you have had this vote, but we're going to ignore it, there would be riots on the streets. We do not value our democracy because we did not have to fight for it, but my grandmother did. And people who remember in this country, people who fought for our democracy, will not throw it away lightly, whether you're on the left or the right, whatever you are. If a vote is ignored in this country and overturn democracy, you only overturn democracy in favour of those in power. And if you're in power now, just remember, in the next generation, your children may not be, and you may be clamouring for that democracy that you have thrown away.
Thank you. Okay. So, do you need this?
I don't know actually. Can everybody hear me? Because I prefer to speak without it, to be honest. And well said, and very passionate, and we couldn't be more different, unfortunately, but there you go. Well, actually, I wrote down here Dog's Breakfast. I thought actually that would have been an apt title for the session today, because whichever side of the political spectrum you're on, the last 3 years or more has not been very pleasant for anybody, whether you're pro-European or pro-getting out of Europe. And I do think that there's been a complete mismanagement of the whole process. And the Tories are very good at blaming everybody else for their failures. And I think that, to my mind, they've been in government and they've failed miserably to manage the process. Now, this is actually coming from the point of view of somebody who voted Remain. And actually, straight after the election, I thought, okay, we've been through a democratic process, let's go with it, and hopefully the government will manage the process in a sensible way, and we will leave Europe in a managed fashion. That didn't happen, and I think within about 6 months, I totally changed my mind, my approach, and got involved in trying to fight to stop Brexit. I'm from Manchester. My wife is half German, half Swiss, and I've got 2 in-laws, one who's Portuguese and Canadian. I had an email from my Portuguese sister-in-law the other week saying that, now this is a lady who married an Englishman, my wife's brother. She has 2 children born in this country. She's lived here for 25 years, went to university in Southampton, and she applied for settled status, and she was told by the Home Office that she could stay in the country for another 5 years, implying that after 5 years she'd have to leave. And it beggars belief to me that a government and a country like ours, I mean, we should be disgusted with that behaviour. It's totally inappropriate, and actually that is, to my mind, what it might become like post-Brexit, because actually that attitude is already there pre-Brexit. So that's just a personal anecdote. Beware of what you wish for would be my phrase, and I totally agree with Ellie, who I think said earlier that, I hear what you're saying, Annette, about David Cameron's leaflet, but what David Cameron's leaflet didn't do was present a Brexit manifesto. You know, in an election, a party has to produce a manifesto. There wasn't really a consistent view on what Brexit would be like, and actually, if I was a Brexiteer, I'd be a bit pretty miffed. But the problem is that there isn't one view of what Brexit looks like. And so I would just say be careful for what you wish for. It's easy to vote for something you don't want, but it's, what are you going to get in its place would be my concern. Okay, actually I came into the Liberal Democrat Party in 2015 because I was really upset about the fact that the Lib Dems had got it in the neck and the blame for the coalition government. And actually I felt that the Lib Dems tempered a hard right-wing Tory government and did some very good things. That aside, my background is international trade. I've been a business development manager for large and small companies. I've been selling in Asia Pacific, Europe and North America, and I went to South America once even. I've also worked in the higher education sector in Wales, and I've had some dealings with the universities here in Birmingham. Why do I think it would be good for Britain to remain in Europe? Well, firstly, I was born in 1950, and so I think technically I'm a baby boomer. So post-war, and in that time, my understanding is we've had 70 years of peace in Europe, and let's not forget that. Because prior to those 70 years, I think most of Europe was at war at one time or another for many centuries. So don't underestimate because people very quickly forget that. And I think Europe and the common market and the EU has brought 70 years of peace, which I think is an important thing to say. The other thing I would say is coming to the West Midlands. The West Midlands, to me, is a fantastic place for manufacturing and industry, and in particular, the car industry. But the car industry, when I was a young lad, was run by British companies. The car industry now is run by Indian, Japanese, and German companies. And actually, I had a lot of dealings with some large Japanese businesses, and I asked them, why do you want to come to Britain? Well, we like the British. We can relate to them. Why do you want to manufacture in Birmingham? Well, because we have access to the European market. These companies will divest of their car industry manufacturing in the West Midlands if we come out of Europe. And that is not a scare story, that is an actual fact. That is going to happen. Believe you me, that is going to happen. The other thing I would say is that, look, I've been exporting to the old colonies, the British Empire, good old British Empire for many years, and we do business overseas already. Most 50% or more of our business is in Europe, and it's a bit like saying to your main customer, okay, well, bye-bye, we'll go somewhere else. Well, we've been trying to do business elsewhere for many, many years, and we have a lot of business elsewhere, but don't think that you could replace that European business with business elsewhere. Okay, taking a different tack.
I'll give you a minute.
Okay. I mentor startup businesses, and I really worry for our youth. The EU gives fantastic opportunities for education, work and social reasons to be in Europe, so I think that is a good reason to stay. The last thing I would say is that I think that the main reason people voted for leave was because of actually some of the things that Annette said. But the problem is Westminster and the UK government. The UK government is the most central of all the European governments. 5% of our tax revenues are managed by the regions. In Europe, in Germany, 20% of the tax revenues are managed by the regions. And so the problem is not Europe, the problem is Westminster. We need to fight for more devolution in the West Midlands to ensure that we get more of the tax revenues, to get more of the investment, to develop the economy and to improve people's lot in life. Thank you.
Thank you, David. I will invite you all, of course, if you're not doing so already, to share your thoughts with us on the Twitter hashtag. And of course, always feel free to follow us at BC_Brexit. Right. Now, we're due to finish at 10 o'clock, so that means we're only going to ask each of you one question to maximise audience participation. Aaron, I'm going to start with you again. I'm going to offer you a scenario. You get elected as the independent stroke Brexit MP for Stourbridge, and if the Johnson government is returned and wants to pursue a trade agreement with the United States, how would your vote, hypothetically speaking, pan out if the NHS quota was for sale? Bear in mind you're an MP, you've got to put the stance on these
I
things.
don't understand how many more times it can be said publicly that the NHS is not for sale. There was a document Labour found, very much on the internet for God knows how many years. It was a handful of times the NHS was explicitly mentioned. And this meeting that happened was 2 years ago. I don't understand how the NHS is for sale. Trump has explicitly stated he doesn't want any part of the NHS. Johnson, whether you believe him or not, doesn't want to sell off the NHS. I don't understand what, at the end of the day, the idea of a trade deal with the United States is that we've got a broader market in which to buy from and which to sell to. As far as drug prices go, I keep hearing people say about insulin, or the price of insulin, for example. It's like, well, I've actually bought insulin from the United States in Walmart, 1,000 IU, 10 ml bottle, and it was $25, right? That is a lot less than we pay over here for insulin. So this whole NHS for sale is absolute nonsense. Can I just pick up on a point? This is really sort of not, David mentioned about peace in Europe. Peace in Europe is thanks to NATO, right? Not the EU, right? The EU are purposely underfunding NATO to get rid of it. The EU do not want NATO around, okay? That's why Trump is so adamant that other countries pay their fair share of GDP, which is 2%. So it's not thanks to the EU at all. Just mind-blowing, to be quite honest. Sorry, what was the question?
The question was, would you vote in favour of a trade agreement with the United States if American drug companies were to have access to the NHS?
If I'm elected as an independent, I would listen solely to the people of Stourbridge. At the end of the day, I have no party to follow, I have nobody to answer to apart from the people of Stourbridge. So I would come back with the facts, I'd say, well, which way do you want me to vote on this? If they ask my opinion, I'd give my opinion. As to what my opinion is, and what their answer would be, I guess would entirely depend on what the trade deal looked like.
Okay, thank you. Ellie, do you think climate change has been given enough attention in this election?
I think climate change gets a lot of lip service. My fear is that because of our broken political system, in which power is concentrated in the two main parties, the level of public concern about the climate crisis isn't going to get translated into the level of political power that's needed to push real action forward. So you see the statistics saying that whereas 2 years ago, there was a proportion of the population that were concerned about the environment. Now a majority of the population say that environmental concern, and particularly concern about the climate crisis, is going to be a significant factor in how they're going to vote, right? But I'm anxious that that won't get translated. If Labour get to form a government, then I think we've got a better chance of holding them to account on it. If the Conservatives do, I'm really worried, because they've had power for nearly 10 years, and actually they've taken away all sorts of programmes that we used to have. Subsidies, investment in renewable energy, standards for zero carbon buildings, all of those sorts of things have been taken away.
So if I put a Brexit angle on this, do you think that environmental standards would be on the table in a trade discussion with the United States?
It's absolutely clear that they are, and I'm, to be honest, a little bit surprised to hear Aaron being so kind of dismissive of that question, because if you look at the extracts from the documents, which are unredacted minutes of a series of meetings between trade negotiators from the UK and the US. If you look at those documents, you can see very clear, explicit mention from the US side that they want the health service to be part of the negotiations. You can see extremely clear indications from the US side that the challenges to environmental and social standards are fundamental to having those negotiations in the first place. That is what exiting from the EU is about. That is why Johnson's key change from the May deal is to put the environmental and social standards into the waffly political declaration bit and out of the actual legal bit, which holds us to existing EU standards. So I think there's a real danger there, because the whole purpose of Brexit is actually deregulation. And we face the choice between continuing to be a member of a club where we're about 15% of the population of that club. I'm a bit suspicious of this thing, we should lead Europe, we should be the dominant influence. The whole point of Europe is that it's a club in which we work together. I think we need to get away from politics in which we're seeking to be dominant, but I think we do face a choice between being part of a club in which we work together to find ways forward that benefit all of us. The option that's on the table with an orientation towards the US is essentially being subordinate. Clearly, we have a much smaller economy. We're much smaller on the world stage. It's a totally unequal negotiation, whereas in Europe, there's a much more equal negotiation with our existing partners.
Thank you. Okay. Plenty of opportunity to come back on some of these issues. Adrian, I'm going to ask a slightly different question. I know you haven't read the Labour manifesto. Labour, of course, have made a lot of commitments to spending, for example, free broadband in a sense by nationalising that chunk of the network relating to broadband coverage. The Institute for Fiscal Studies, for example, has criticised Labour's spending policy, and of course the Conservatives as well, it should be said, as being somewhat impractical. Do you have a view on this? What would your response to that be?
My response is that most of the policy changes that have been declared, and they will have public spending implications, are actually intended to be implemented over a period of time which will make them manageable. And at least this particular political party, the Labour Party, is trying to, if you like, provide an assessment of the costs of that and a roadmap by which it would be achievable. That is in comparison to the Conservative Party, which is astonishingly promising to get us out of Europe, which will reduce, shall we say, our capacity to fund public expenditure. The OBR reckons it's going to be £30 billion a year. And at the same time, say it's going to cut taxes and increase public spending. Those don't add up, and I've not yet seen any figures that can make them add up. I do think, and I'm speaking independently rather than as a party political representative, that there has been a rather unfortunate auction of public spending promises, which I think need to be very, very carefully worked out. But I do feel that the leadership of my party does recognise that, and recognises that it won't be able to do everything immediately, and the reforms will be calibrated according to the economic capacity of the country to deal with it.
Okay, supplementary question for you. Do you think Jeremy Corbyn should more clearly articulate his stance on Brexit?
Yes, I do. I understand why he hasn't, and I do think the basic position of the Labour Party is a sound one insofar as I explained in my initial remarks. It rules out a no-deal option, but still does give the public the option of coming out of Europe on the basis of a deal which will protect the economy. It will give the public the option of a further vote, and I have no doubt that during the course of the referendum campaign, should it be initiated, the great majority of both the Labour MPs, the Labour Party members and the Cabinet will be supporting that. I think he wishes to have a certain sort of Olympian-like detachment from the process so that he can implement whatever is the outcome in terms of public opinion.
Okay, maybe that's something that you wish to pick up on further. Annette, standing in Perry Barr, I'll ask you the devil's advocate question. Do you think that there's any risk that standing with a Conservative could split the Leave vote? Yeah.
My voice doesn't carry.
So I have a question for you, David, as well, to
So Perry Barr, I don't know how much any of you know of Perry Barr. So the constituency of Perry Barr covers Handsworth, Wood, Perry Barr and Oscott. The current incumbent is a Labour MP by the name of Khalid Mahmood, who campaigned nationally in the Leave, in the referendum. And you can check this out, I've got it on my phone, on the front page of the Birmingham Evening Mail, it says, Khalid Mahmood campaigns to tell ethnic minorities that they are better off outside of the EU. I can show it on my phone. 12 days before the referendum vote in Parliament, he stood there with his Labour colleagues and he voted to remain. Where 287 MPs didn't vote. It was a vote, and I'm not sure who called it, but the majority of people in there were Labour Party, and despite Khalid Mahmood publicly campaigning to tell ethnic minorities, and the majority of people in Perry Barr are ethnic minorities, and obviously Khalid Mahmood was born in Kashmir, he publicly stood and said ethnic minority people are better off to leave the EU, and then when he got to Parliament, when he was put under pressure by his friends, you know, to keep his job and keep his importance, he voted Remain. And that, if you can research that, it was 12 days before the referendum. If you go on theyworkforyou.com, you can see the results of that. I've got a photograph of that if anybody would like to see. So the hypocrisy, the overwhelming hypocrisy of the current incumbent is staggering. Okay, so Labour it's been a safe Labour seat for almost forever. There's been one Conservative person, a woman I believe, who was there for one term 45 years ago. It has been a Labour safe seat for 40 years. I grew up voting Labour. I didn't vote for the current incumbent because I haven't been there to be able to vote while he was there, but his predecessor, Jeffrey Gray, voted for. Right? In the previous elections, Labour always get 30,000 of the vote. Conservative get 13,000. Right? So Conservatives get less than 50%. When UKIP stood, Conservative vote went down to 7,000 and UKIP got 5,000. Right? The Brexit Party it's a different beast altogether than UKIP. It is not a UKIP replacement. Okay? The majority of people in Perry Barr voted for Leave. Now, it's a small majority, but it is across the country, but a majority of people voted for Leave. So we have an MP who campaigned for Leave, and when it was in his interests, he voted for Remain, and he denied it at the hustings the other night. Well, I don't know if anyone knows Chicken George, the radio presenter. We did a hustings with him. You ask him, okay? So Kelly denied voting for Remain. Right? He's very, very unpopular in Perry Barr. Right? I have been walking the streets for 6 weeks. I met a couple. I was campaigning there. I don't know if you know the area, Perry Villa Drive next to the stadium. I used to live on the Aldridge Road.
If you got elected to Perry Barr, what would your priorities be?
My priorities, okay. So let me know. The Commonwealth Games is coming to Perry Barr in 2022. I went to see. I was out. Just happened to be out on Holford Drive. People will know Holford Drive. They got the poster, the depot for the big men. Very controversial because they hate it because they've been on strike, and they hate the fact they've been on strike. Across from there is the Hub, which is a sports centre where, oh God, this name's gone out of my head, the guy who runs it, has an MBE for his services for helping kids get away from knife crime and get away from gangs. And his name will come back to me in a minute, I'm sorry for the name that's gone round. It's not John Lloyd, no, it'll come back to me. So he has met the Queen, he has met Prince Charles, he has had Prince William in, right? I asked him and his assistants, Diana who works with him, I said to her, so what's your legacy from the Games? You know, the athletes are going to be training and your venue is closer to the stadium and the Olympic Village. What is your venue? What is your legacy? A plaque. And he says, I cannot feed my kids with a plaque. I cannot keep them dry and warm with a plaque. I cannot keep them out of gangs with a plaque. You keep your plaque, you give me a legacy.
And my promise to the people of Barr is their legacy from the money that's being invested there is not going to be spent on a road that is the only decent road in that area that works, to be knocked down because people think it's ugly. I do not care about ugly. I am an accountant, and the fundamental principle is substance over form. I do not care what it looks like, the same as I do not care the colour of your skin or your religion. I do not care about the outside. I care about what goes on underneath. And while we have a guy who is standing there and his people are giving everything they've got to keep people safe and alive, now, my nephew was murdered last year, right, in the constituency, by someone in the constituency. I understand the grief, I understand the law process. I have visited people in Winson Green Prison who they now call the finishing school for people in Barr. That has to stop, right? Now the money, whatever the cuts have been over the last 10 years, have been equal. The money is spent per capita. If you go into that Labour area where the bins have not been emptied and there are rats on the street, and there is rising crime, right? The same money is spent in Solihull, but it is spent differently in Solihull. They would not stand for it in Solihull if the bins were not emptied and the rats were running around. This is a deliberate economic policy by the local government to make people at the bottom who are poor blame other people who are rich for the fact that they're poor. And I would stand there amongst my friends and my fellow people of Aston and Newtown and Barr, because people started in Aston, moved into Newtown, moved into Barr. It's the same group of people, the demographics are the same. We demand in that area an MP who has, I was going to say balls, but it's not, it's integrity. I will fight for the people there because I am one of the people. And I will ensure that those organisations, women's organisations, that are helping women who are not allowed to leave the house and have to sneak out when the people who control them are not there
I'm
to sneak
going to
out.
stop you there because I'm conscious of time.
Sorry, let me say, women's groups, children's groups, they will get my help.
David, I have
Yes.
a question for you. Liberal Democrats were in coalition with the Conservatives for 5 years. You said it was what propelled you to join the party.
Yeah.
Because you want to overcome the perceptions around that. I put to me by journalists that if Boris Johnson was returned and he was in a hung parliament and he could not secure the support of the DUP for his agreement, who else would he turn to? And the question was thrown at me, would the Liberal Democrats ever support or prop up the Tory government, say, in exchange for another referendum on Europe?
Well, that's a very good question. Most I'd have to ask Jo Swinson that question, because I think she has publicly said that she wouldn't form a coalition with a Johnson-led Tory party or a Corbyn-led Labour party. And I did notice that she didn't say that if they had other leaders, whether that would be the case.
Coalition is one thing, a confidence and supply arrangement for voting through things on a case-by-case or other scenarios, aren't they?
Exactly.
Sorry, can I just add, Jo Swinson's most...
Aaron, can I let him answer, please?
Can we...
I'd rather not hear your opinion, Jo.
Yeah.
It's not opinions, it's fact.
Enough people.
Yeah, so, okay. The problem I think we have got, and actually I live over in Shrewsbury and I was at a meeting the other night talking about tactical voting. And tactical voting seems to be quite an issue in this election. You know, why is that? Well, coming back to a point that Ellie made earlier, it's because of the voting system that we have. And I'll just say one thing about that, because I do think it's something that's really important to highlight. Somebody at that meeting said that the opinion polls were showing that Labour would get around 30+% of the vote nationally, and the Lib Dems would get 15% of the vote nationally. And Labour would get 250 plus MPs, and the Lib Dems would get 12 MPs. You know, that cannot be right. That is not democratic to my mind. Now, okay, we are where we are. If you vote Lib Dem, we are for proportional representation and changing the voting system, and that's a good reason to vote Lib Dem if nothing else. It's not going to have an impact on this election, which is a first past the post system. What I'm finding on the, well, I'm not doing door-to-door canvassing myself, but I'm in touch with all our PPCs across the West Midlands, and what we're finding is that there are what I would call Blairite Labour people who are rather anti-Corbyn who are coming over to us, and there are what I call Ken Clark type Tories who are coming over to us. If you like, politicians that in the past have been more liberal-minded and less, if you like, right-wing or left-wing than Corbyn or Johnson. I think those two leaders, create a problem. They will create a problem for the Lib Dem party, I think, because it looks as though there is a distinct possibility that there could be a hung parliament. But I think the other party that is going to have an influence on that is the SNP, because they could end up with 45, 50 seats in Parliament. The Lib Dems maybe 30, 40 seats if we do really well. So I think it is inevitable that in that scenario that there is going to have to be some discussion, and the discussion is, well, is it a coalition? No, not with Corbyn, not with Johnson, and are there other ways of managing the situation, a la what you just said. The fundamental problem here is that we shouldn't have had a general election. We should have had a people's vote.
Okay, we'll come back to that because I've got about half an hour, so I'm going to very little.